this is kind of a casual conversation, and Bob brought a bunch of stuff out, and this will be a saw college. To start the conversation, though, you need a little bit of history. And true to form, Bob comes up with these books. It probably came sometime before the Dark Ages, and had the prehistoric saws. You know, you could see Freddie Flintstone running some of this stuff. But, you know, fact of the matter is some of this stuff is pretty sophisticated. And if you're a hobbyist or a collector, it's fun to build them. And in all seriousness, what this points out is that Husqvarna has been building some pretty sophisticated saws for a very, very long time. And before we even get started, you know, Bob dropped this cylinder out here. And of course, you know, got to make a comment on this. Look at that port layout. Closed transfer ports. And it's one that you've seen on a whole lot of saws. Husqvarna went away from this in the mid-90s with the 372 and the 357 and the like. But you see stills with this layout built all the way up until just a couple years back. And Husqvarna and Johnsford have been doing this since the 60s.
That's from the 70s there. That's from a 340 SG, the carcass of which is sitting over there. The SG is the one with all the extra wires over here.
Oh, because of the heated handle.
Yeah. We've been talking and BS all day long.
Yeah.
I'm just about talked out, but I guess we got to do some more talking.
That ain't going to happen.
But just one thing, because Steve Robb, who watches a lot of these videos, always kind of introduces his video and introduces a beer at the same time.
That's correct.
So I just want Steve to see that we have Captain Lawrence Brewing Company, a Hop Commander IPA with the nice red Dodge Power Wagon on the label. And so we're liable to be even a little bit sillier than we usually are. It got up in about the 90s today.
Oh, it was warm.
You will not see the typical fire that we have. There will be no fireside chat today because it did hit 90. It's down to like 81 right now, and it feels great. And I'm ready for the leaves to start turning.
Before Bob gets going, notice there's a 40 and there's another 40. Totally different chassis. Kind of an anomaly. Notice there's a 340 up there, and that's from 1977. Of course, there's a 340 they sell a couple years back too. So some of the numbers that you see with the Husqvarna models have been repeated over time. And
there's actually 3 models on this chassis. We're kind of going to play around with 2 different chassis here, and there's a little interesting story because they overlapped a little bit. The first chassis was this one down below. The 444 was the hot dog of the group, and then there was some of these. These are what began the first models, what eventually became the 242 and the 246. I mean, a lot of people know about the 242, but there was this is what it started out as in 1980. This chassis, we don't have a book for it. I don't think, it's probably in a different binder, but this chassis started as the 140S and SG. That came out in 1973, so they're about 7 years apart. The thing that's interesting though is, you know, both chassis, like a lot of Huskies, you had your kind of your open port consumer versions, and then you had your pro stuff. The same thing took place with the 242 family that started out up there, and what happened was there was actually some overlap up until about 1986. They continued on with the 44s at least. I think everything else went away, and the 133 was it's an SE. You know, an SE, for people that aren't sure what that is, that's before they called everything an XP. They called it an SE, and we got all kinds of goofy marketing terms here like Practica. I don't know what that means. It was probably the same guy that came up with Ulticore on the Johnsreds. Yeah. These stupid words that they made up. You know, so what happened during the overlap period, you know, these were all pretty much SE or XP saws on that chassis until they came out with the 42 and then the 246, at which point they let this go. But you can see the 40 and 44 started out first as Practica, then as Ranchers. The one example we got here has got Rancher written on it, and then it went to the to the up until when everything went from the white top to the gray tops. Chassis essentially replaced this chassis.
Right.
The difference is that like I said, this one started in '73. This one started in 1980, and then when that came out, that kind of filled the pro stuff. Although you see that the 444, this is from 1984, so there was some overlap there for a few years, and they kept.
This was from '85.
Well, yeah, so I mean, I'm pretty sure this went up to '86 at least. So they were still making these things. So they actually did run concurrently, and there was overlap, not just the fact that they were both there, but you would have to say that 1984. That this and this were essentially, kind of targeted at the same customer. Key point, though, is that when this thing first came out, I mean, that is a 34cc saw, where this is 44cc. So one of the reasons they kept them around a little bit is because you got 10cc difference in these compact small saws. It's actually kind of significant.
How much of a weight difference was there between the two chassis?
By the time they got into the plastic tanks, not as much. The early saws on this chassis, as you can see, I don't know if these are in the frame or not. This one's metal.
No kidding. It is.
Yeah.
Also, let me get this in the frame. This has got a metal tank handle, where the 133
and this is plastic.
Okay.
And same thing over here. But when we get down to those, I've got one of each. So they were a little heavy for the frame, for the size, because the metal tanks were still there. This series here, next one up was a 238. These all had, I think, 30 millimeter strokes, and these had like 32 millimeter strokes. So this one, the next size up was a 238. You've got a 238.
Yeah,
which is
at the house.
Butt-kicking little saw for 38 cc's.
Yes, it is.
That thing runs really, really good. This runs. We're not going to run anything today because of the heat and the time and everything else. But the 444 is really a nice running saw.
So on both these chassis, are there parts available, or is it NLA for the one and available for the other, or which one? If you're a collector, which is the one that you'd rather pick up and why? That's a tough question.
Well, it's two different questions. I mean, as far as parts availability goes, on the original series, it's horrible. The most common saws, because they ran them for the longest time, the 44s. There's a lot of 44s around. There's really not too much you can get for these. You can still get fuel lines, and like a lot of things, there's early fuel lines and later things like that. You can't really get ignition stuff. Carburetor stuff you can get. Top ends long gone. I don't think you can get mufflers or anything like that. So, from a collector's standpoint or a hobbyist standpoint, if you get something, you want it to be complete. Like the 444 SG that I have here on the deck, it was complete, but it didn't have a starter. Now I had a starter on another carcass that had been sitting around, so that's what, which I think is what came off of that one there. So I had a starter that I could use. The parts availability on the 133 through 242 series is better, but getting worse. There's stuff going away, and you really can't get, I think, except for the last time I looked, the only complete OEM top end that you could get for anything on that chassis was the open port 42. There is a good aftermarket 242 kit by Tacomac you can get from Tilton.
Yeah.
It's about, it's not cheap like the Chinese kits. It's made in Italy. It's like super good quality. That's the only one that's still out there. 242s, which is the most popular and the most interesting one, you not only is the OEM cylinder, but you can't even get an OEM piston. So I've done a few, with the Mako aftermarket pistons.
But I guess the point is that that series, first of all, I don't know if the 133 is close, but I know the 234, 238, you can put the later top ends and stuff on them, can't you?
Oh yeah, you can mix and match all the top ends. And these are really the same saw. They got away, this is about when they went from the 100s to the 200s, and there really is not a difference in that displacement.
Because I took a 238 bottom end and put a
Yeah.
242 top end on it.
Yeah.
And the 42 turned into a 242, so I did match parts around. So of the two chassis, it's more interesting from a historical perspective to have the 40, 44 in 240, 340, and 444. It's interesting nomenclature. But if you are a hobbyist that actually want to use the stuff that you build, probably that 133, 234 chassis is probably a smarter direction to go.
Oh, it is, especially if you're going to need stuff. You know, even if stuff isn't available new from the factory, you know, there's more of that out there. But here again, you got a lot of that interchangeability here. You know, these are more interesting, you know, from the collector mentality because they're much more rare and harder to find. With the exception of the 44s, like, you know, Bill over Massachusetts said there's so many of them around, he doesn't even really, you know, find them interesting.
Performance-wise, displacement for displacement, I mean, they have a similar design. Is there a big difference in how they run? Because those 242s are screamers. No, even with today's standards, they're a screamer.
Yeah, well, yeah, they are, but this is right with it.
So they're in the
Easily.
same performance class.
Oh, God, yeah, at least. Yeah, I mean, like I said, at some point, you know, we'll have to run that. When you run the 444, you'll be telling me to find you one. And you'll be looking for one for yourself because they are that good. No,
444.
444 SG, heated grips. And we went through, somebody saw us, some of the guys been following a little thread that we got going. We found these in a buyout, a pile of dead saws. And when you're going through and you say, oh, look, it's got the extra switch. Because up here in the north, you know, especially when the collection, you start to get almost everything, then you start looking for the G models. And what you never really quite know until you get them going is, does the heat work? Because you can splice wires and stuff, but if these things are burned out, they're burned out and you can't replace them.
And G stands for generator.
Yes. So let's talk a little bit. These are the two early ones we got, and starting with this one is an early one because, as you can see, it's got the metal tank, and you got the heating elements here, single top. You know, unlike the 61, like your 61 that we've had in some videos where you got the 272 kit on it. Later on, when the 61, I think even with the white top, they went from that single thing. I'm pretty sure on these they never got away from that single top cover screw. You know, this saw was, you know, other than the starter, which came from that carcass over there, this saw was complete. A little banged up. You know, we got a little bit of a hole there that we're, you know, miracle tape there. If you get up tight on this, you'll see that it's kind of clean in there. Here again, things that you can't get. I mean, you can't get these air filters. When you go back far, you know, from, you know, the guys messing around with stuff, you know, you're not going to find that Asian aftermarket companies aren't going to gear up to make things for saws where the field population is really small. You're not going to see that stuff. But you'll recognize that looks like your 61 intake there a little bit.
It does. That I gutted.
Yeah. So these things are pretty easy to work on. But again, you want a complete saw. Like, you know, if that throttle link's missing, you're going to have to make one because you can't get them. So this was actually a pleasant surprise. I had been looking for a 444 for a long time, and then I found this. So I found the 444 Plus. I had the G version, so I kind of like a double score there. This is completely stock. I didn't want to start messing around with stuff that you can't replace.
Yeah.
So I went in there. You know, you can actually still get the gaskets for these.
No kidding.
Just a few things you can. So all I did, I went in, I cleaned it up, I put a ring in it. You know, I think it's a 44 millimeter ring, the same ring you would put in a 350 or a 49 SP. Right?
Which is another point, that the piston ring grooves across many years.
Oh yeah.
And the Husqvarna line are the same.
Yep. Now this clean little saw. This is the 44. When I started putting Rancher on everything. Remember, there was a 50 Rancher, the 61 Rancher you got. What's interesting about this, you know, I got these, you've seen these in the videos, Walt and I both use these Dolmar bars that we got from Scott and Steve up at the Cutting Edge. And the funny thing is, I got this saw from them. And one of their first GTGs they had this, just selling all the oddball saws. So I got this, you know, pretty cheap. You know, not the 6-pack of Sam Adams cheap, but of course you see, I don't know if you're close on You know, this has the, this has got the plastic tank. It's a later one. It looks like it's 1980. And here's another thing. With all these marketing terms, it causes a lot of confusion with people with SE and XP and this, that, and the other. And sometimes they would go from Practica to Rancher, and they would go from SE to XP, and they would lag on the ID tags. It says Practica on the ID tag, but it doesn't say Practica on the top cover, which some of them do. And it's just got the Rancher thing going on here. So this saw's in good shape. It runs pretty good. Walt already showed you the muffler on the 444. Versus that muffler, you know, which, you know, kind of the fish gill type. You know, and here again, you know, you could say, well, you know, you ought to crank that up and do, you know what? Every saw doesn't have to be modified, and some things I think are better left stock. You know, it's not like it doesn't cut wood. It runs pretty good. Not like this, obviously. The other thing is, you know, this is back in the era where you know, chain brakes are still kind of an option. They would come on some, not on others. So this saw doesn't have a chain brake, but I've got this from that 340 SG carcass over there, which I can put on. Then I'll have a chain brake. I just, you know, we got to polish this up, you know, because it's real important how you cut wood. This is, as long as this is shiny, it makes a big difference. But what I do, like you see, this one's nice and clean. Is I just get sandpaper and just buff them up a little. So that's all. That's all that is. So this chassis, there were 6 models on each chassis. You had the 140, you had the 40, you had the 44, 240, 340, and 444. Then over there on the other chassis here, you had the 133, 234, 238, 42, 242, 246. So, you know, you got 12 different, I don't have them all yet.
Yet. That's the operative word here.
Yeah, well, here again, Bill, if you're watching this video, you know, if we want to swap out that 133 SG for something, let me know.
Careful.
But, yeah, I know, because it wants something I don't want to part with.
You'll probably get somebody from Russia or something like that say, you know, we've got one.
No, we're not going to do that. And nobody's going to get that 154 SG either. So that's that chassis. We don't need to open up all these. I don't know if you scanned these or not before.
Probably. I'll just run through. You point to them and say what they are.
Oh, well, this is just the 42 special, which was the later version. The only thing special about it from the earlier 42 was the word special on a decal. There's nothing else different about the saw. The you know, the 42 when it first came out had this gray top on it, and this top, you can see the faded decal. This is from a 42, although the saw is a 242 XPG. Again, heated handles. We got the extra switch over here. It came in the same hole that I got the 444 from. I just did this nice decal, 242G on it. You know, when I put this thing together, I was like, well, the only top that was really laying around at the moment was the dark one, plus it separates it from the other 242s, and I was like, well, I know that's not right, we got to get that off of there. But then a few guys have said, no, leave it on, it looks nice. So, a couple things we also got to point out. One of the reasons you want to share this stuff is that if you get on these books here, we talked a little bit before about the model numbers being the same. Even the vaunted, you know, Mike Akers site, which has a ton of information, and it covers so many topics, it's impossible for that site to be complete. But you won't find this 40 on that site. And there's, you know, just 40. It's, you know, it's this. And if you go into look at trying for guys that are looking at the online libraries of Husqvarna, even if you go to the Husky site, you know, you're going to get this, which is the partner-based 40. You're not going to even find this stuff. So that's why we're just kind of throwing all this stuff out there, kind of share it with everybody. And the last topic is, you know, since we've got these saws, oh yeah, I have to crack a joke here. You know, I try to get most of these things to match, and you can't really always go by what it says on the outside, because as we saw, you know, with one video that we did at the hedgerow there, where Walter had 42 on the outside, but he had a 242 cylinder on the inside. So you don't always know, especially, and I'm making a joke here, but also all saws that are going back, 25 years or something, you don't know what's been changed over the years on that. Sometimes people change stuff by accident, and sometimes people change stuff intentionally, and they conceal those changes deliberately, so they can say their saw runs better. But those kind of things happen. But we do run these things. I just ran that 444 because that's new. I ran that last winter, and when I like to play with the G models in the wintertime. But these 242s, 238s, we actually use these things in our, not the hobby life, but the cutting life, when we're working in the woods or doing firewood and stuff. And as small as they are, they run awful good. In some ways, this is the one I use the most. And it's either my little Farmer Jones approach here, do the muffler mod and get rid of the gasket. This thing really, really punches above its weight. There's nothing that really quite feels like these. The 543 kind of gets there on feel and weight and everything, size, the compactness of the chassis, but it just doesn't come anywhere near it, I don't think, in power.
Nope.
Yeah, it's got some advantages. It
Starts easier.
Yeah, it's a nice, it works.
Has the primer bulb.
Yeah, it does. But the thing is, if you start getting into bigger material, breaking down tops and things,
Oh yeah.
you're going to set that down and reach for something bigger a lot sooner than you will with this. These things just keep going.
That's it. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to take the camera and then walk it around and do some close-ups on the book. And maybe some people can find this information useful. And again, these are the two different saws of similar era with the same number.
And there will be a future video on the partner connection here, of which that saw will be part of the story.
You can tell from right up here the difference between the two different chassis. It becomes apparent right there. Also, where the on the handle where the gas cap is, the older ones are high, and the newer ones are a little bit lower. You see that right there versus these. And looks to me like this poor 246, as pretty as it is kind of like that. Well, I don't want to say something bad about it, but it's that saw that nobody really wants to use when they have the 242 around. I'll take some snapshots of the tags too.
They actually run pretty good, but nothing. You know what else is?
Notice this one here is 242, but it doesn't have the XP yet, and that one does, but they're still identical. It's just tags. And this one has a G on it, so you actually have three 242s, 3 sets of decals. Obviously, that being the later version and this being earlier. Notice it's got a smaller area for the decal, different pull start. And the G for generator has the heated handles.
Well, you're also looking at some differences in the years here. This is a 91, this is a 94, and that's an 88.
Oop.
I believe.
88. This one is a 91, you said?
Yeah.
No, over here, that's a 94. And how do you tell that?
The first number here, the 4, is the year. And it was made, this is an early one, it was made in the first week of the year. And it's number 43. This was made for Richard Petty.
Pretty good. Can't make that stuff up. So that's 91.
And it's look at it's one digit, 044.
So it's another
different
early
year,
one.
but like it's kind of a similar sequence.
And that's an 88 because of the 8.
Yeah.
So those are the 242s.
Yeah, see, things would be confusing. This could be a
98.
A 98, but
you know from the model.
This is a little bit different here, and then of course this.
So this 42 being with a later cover,
yeah,
and that being a 6 is probably a 96. Would that be fair?
Oh yeah, because this is later. Yeah, you see, The other thing too is where you notice there's a slight difference in the tags. But this is newer here versus these other ones.
Yeah.
Is that this just says Husqvarna Sweden and this says Husqvarna AB with the town. So they had changed that. So that's why I'm saying this is an 88, not a 98.
See, that's ancillary knowledge that nobody's going to have. And of course, these earlier generation saws, they have completely different tags. So, and yeah, again, you can see the difference in both where the case is right there is different versus these, and then the handle is different than these. So, anyway, cool stuff. What do you say?
I love the breeze.
Yeah, I know it. Well, I think I'm going to close this one off. It's getting a little bit late. At some point in time, I got to get in that truck there and drive. So, talk to you later. Bye for now.